Hi, my name is Jingo and I'm going to be analyzing Ultra Heaven. It's going to be split into 3 parts, one for each volume. This is the first volume. So the way I'm going to structure this analysis is by going through the whole story, explaining everything I see. It's basically a regurgitation of the manga. Also, massive disclaimer, this is all my opinion, so I might be wrong on some things and I might miss some details. So if you caught anything I missed, feel free to comment below. I really appreciate it. Okay, volume 1. So we start off with the Lipopamine D commercial in space. And here we get baited into thinking that the manga is set far in the future, where humans are able to live in space, perfect for a story about a drug-ridden dystopia. But as we know, that's not the case. We know that Ultra Heaven is set in the nearish future, shown by the normal skyline and fairly odd technology. This is only a small detail, but as we move further in the story, especially in the second or third volume, the architecture changes. It gets progressively weirder as we get deeper into the dream world. So after the commercial, we follow the actors a little bit, and there's this nice line about using live actors, implying that they use CGI for machines or something. And then we see this weird thing that doesn't show up anywhere else in the manga. I'm not sure exactly what it is. Maybe it's the first version of how they represent consciousness. I think it was just too hard to draw. Then there's this crazy transition into another commercial after talking about dipping into the virtual stuff. None of this is explained, it's just soft world building, and it sets this mysterious tone. Now from the commercial we transition again to a TV, and then we meet our protagonist Kabu. He's fucked up on a couch, his room is a mess, he's a junkie, and he's not living right. He then uses a shot of Peter Pan, takes a bath or a wash, I'm not sure, and he goes to the Pump Bar Nova. And in that bar we get to learn a lot of stuff. First of all, we learn about the role of drugs in society. We see the salaryman. One of them is having trouble in work and he uses the drugs to cope, kind of like alcohol, which is why we're in a bar. We also learn how pump bars work as well as the standing of junkies. They are lowlifes, and funnily enough, one junkie walks in a bar and his name is Kabu. We get a lot of good exposition from the way Kabu interacts with the men in suits. It gives really good insight into Kabu's character as a hopeless dead-end guy. We also see how the salarymen treat Kabu disrespectfully, and this pretty much parallels how we treat junkies in the real world. Moving on, we then get the first glimpse into the way Kabu thinks. He talks about watching a TV show as a child. The show aired once a week and he was so excited about watching it, he fell asleep before it even started. And when he woke up, the show had already ended. And now you can watch anything anytime you want. No need to record. He's basically talking about drugs, the TV show being the drug. Drugs used to feel special. It was difficult to get a hold of. Once a week, you gotta record it first. But after the legalization of drugs and the mass adoption, it feels cheap. Everything's available. When Kabu talks about missing out on the show, he's talking about missing out on the glory days, or the early days when drugs were first legalized. When he was young, he was excited about the future of drugs in society, the promise it brings. But by the time he was old enough, the excitement around the drugs was all gone. None of the promises fulfilled. He says, "When I woke up again, it was already dark," referring to that. And actually earlier in his apartment, Kabu says the same thing. "When I opened my eyes, it was already dark." It's quite similar to the baby boomer situation where the older generation enjoyed the rich economy and the generations after that had way less. If we look specifically into Japan, we can look at the booming economy of the early 80s and the stagnation of the 90s. And this gap in success between the two generations caused a lot of friction between them. Considering the first volume was released in 2003, I think this was the dynamic Mr. KOIKE was going for, with this interaction in a bar. But back to the manga. In the process of talking, Kabu pumps a cocktail in his veins to realize that the bartender did not give him what he ordered, which was pagila. Kabu pulls out a water cache for the pagila, but it turns out the bartender caught on to what Kabu was trying to do. He was trying to do a simulated suicide by taking Peter Pan and Pagila simultaneously. He wants to die and then get resurrected. Why? Because he was trying to get high off death, basically. Kabu gets denied of the Pagila, and he talks a little bit about how society became so drug-ridden. Pomper's demonstration, it was mentioned in the synopsis of the manga. Quote, when the Pombi's movement obtained the liberalization of the drugs, it seemed a historically meaningful change destined to improve the world, a dream realized in a manner that radically affected humanity's way of life. Though nothing did change for the better. He also mentions the Fruits Children and the amendment of the Pharmaceutical Affairs Law. It's all very vague, but the point is that Kabu's generation missed out. After that, the bartender gives Kabu the Nova Express, a cocktail that takes him on a trip, which I think unlocked Kabu's latent potential. But let's take a look at the trip here. A single drop of water falls into more water, which is probably Kabu's consciousness falling into the universal sea of consciousness, which gives him a heightened level of perception shown by the eyes. The salaryman, who is a loser from before, comes and tries to strangle Kabu, but Kabu squishes his face, only to deform him into Kabu himself. Basically, Kabu's no different than the loser salaryman, and that's why he's looking at the mirror. Then apparently Kabu hates this world, so he tries to leave it. Bam, there's a huge explosion. Kabu floats about in this weird realm as he is filled with ecstasy. Then his consciousness starts to get dissolved until he's reborn as a baby coming out of water, sucking on his mother's teat. We can tell this is his mother, by the way, because of the beauty mark. And then there's an explosion and someone laughing, and we arrive at this image. I don't know if it's intentional, but Kabu's mind is blown, apparently. By the way, I think Kabu's mother is the one who's laughing, and it transitions into Kabu's laughing. Not sure though. So what does this mean? My guess is that the drug unlocked Kabu's latent potential. The massive explosion symbolizes the beginning of his awakening, like the Big Bang. But not just his awakening, but also how he came into this world. Literally, Kabu comes, Kabu ejaculates and he gets deformed into a baby. And this baby coming out of water is kind of like he's getting baptized. He then sees a glimpse of his mother, and then it ends. Now the reason we see his mother is probably related to the theme later on, where to ascend, you must first look within yourself to where and what you came from. And then there's this one page where Kabu's on the moon. I don't know what it means. Maybe he's above everyone else in the city. I don't know. I just thought it was a cool page. Maybe you guys know what it means. We then learn about simulated suicide. Some junkies do that to play around with death. They don't feel alive. And then there's a cool line about prophetic lambs being fascinated by the death god. Then Kabu leaves. After he leaves, the two men at the bar are revealed to be secret agents. I'm guessing they're people from the hygiene department who enforce the drug laws. And they're staking out pump bars for guinea pigs in the form of junkies to be guided on the stairway to heaven. They're trying to find a perfect specimen for their experiment, which we will see at the end of the volume. Now we're at Kabu's apartment. Kabu's cleaning up, and we meet the girl who doesn't have a name besides her alias in the drone, which is Sally, in the third volume. And actually, Sally the Witch is a reference to Sally the Witch, the first magical girl anime from 1966, which is obvious because they have the same chant from the opening. And here's the crazy part. In the anime, Sally has a younger brother. His name is Kabu. So a little explanation on the anime. Sally here is the princess of the magical kingdom, and she goes to the human world because she's bored, and she kind of chills around there. However, her dad, the king, does not want her to stay there. He wants her to come back, so he sends Kabu to get her. But Kabu ends up staying in the human world, not doing his job. Which is ironic because Kabu is depicted as a crow in the anime, and in Japanese mythology, the three-legged bird called Yatagarasu, or eight-span crow. When this bird appears, it is interpreted as the evidence of the will of heaven or divine intervention in human affairs, since in the myth, Yatagarasu guides the emperor to his destination. So Yatagarasu, as a crow god, is a symbol specifically of guidance from a higher place. And in the anime, Kabu is supposed to bring Sally back, or you could say guide her back, as he is ordered by the king of the magical kingdom, which you can say is the will of heaven, divine intervention. And he completely fails to do so, which is pretty funny. And you can also relate this to Ultra Heaven, where the opposite happens in the second volume, as Sally is the one who's trying to bring Kabu back to Earth, I guess, stopping him from ascending. But she also fails to do that, kind of. And there are more parallels. In Sally the Witch, Sally is a headstrong girl with conviction. She's confident, in the anime she even fights bullies, whereas Kabu is unsure of himself. He hasn't really found himself yet. He is 6 years old or something. In Ultra Heaven, they have kind of the same personality. Kabu's jaded and generally feeling lost doing all these drugs, and Sally is kinda, she has more of a direction, being, I guess, popular or successful in the drama. There's some parallels here. And one last thing about the crow metaphor is that the crow is a mark of rebirth and rejuvenation. The bird will eat the bodies of the dead after battles, symbolizing the renaissance after such tragedy. And guess what happens to Kabu in his manga? He gets rebirth. But hey, maybe I'm reaching with all this, especially with all the crow metaphors, so do take it with a grain of salt. Anyway, back to the apartment. Sally comes in to Kabu clean up after the huge trip in the bar. Something definitely changed inside of him, which we will discuss later. And we learn that Kabu's a drug dealer since Sally buys some Alice from him. And then we are introduced to the amplifier, a machine to evolve your inner consciousness, as it says in the pamphlet. Mantra, the specific name of the amplifier, I think, is related to the cult later on in the manga. Sally here is very much a reference to the hippies of the 70s and the 80s, doing drugs and joining spiritual movements or cults. And on the subject of cults, Japan is one of the places where those cults or new religions are quite the craze. As of 2012, there are 183 registered religions. By some estimates, 10 to 20% of the Japanese population has some connection with one of these groups. The amplifier itself is probably a reference to the headgear used by the Shinrikyo, the cult that carried out the 1995 sarin gas attack, which will be discussed later in Volume 2. Moving on, Sally then puts on the amplifier, she uses some Alice, and she's off. A nice detail here is when Kabu looks at her in a sexual angle during her trip, as depicted here. He's not even fazed, not aroused, not blushing. He actually looks annoyed, which goes to show how jaded he is. And now we meet Seven, who I think deserves way more screen time. By the way, he is a reference to Ultra 7, which is a series, a part of the Ultraman series. We can tell by his mohawk and his glasses, which are the same. They're called the Ultra Eye. But why was this reference made? Is it connected to the Ultraman in Volume 3? Not really. I think Mr. KOIKE is just a big fan of Ultraman. Pretty sure he is. I'm pretty sure he's a big fan of Ultraman. Anyway, Seven walks in, and if you notice the layout of the panels, it's exactly the same as when Sally walked in. They ring the doorbell while Kabu's cleaning up. I think this shows how Kabu views them. They're kind of like a nuisance. He doesn't care, he's jaded. So Seven goes on to compliment Sally's navel, and then they talk about when Kabu took the 2 P's and killed himself. How the people who succeed cannot get any P for a while, and the god's invisible hand is in action. They then take some P and they go on a very nice trip, nice visuals. Not really much to say about the trip that's relevant to the bigger narrative here. After the trip, they talk about the simulated suicide. He did die, so it's not exactly simulated. Yeah, Seven mentions the ultimate substance that people release as they die. He's basically talking about DMT. A little recap on DMT. It's a hallucinogenic and psychedelic substance that gives you intense hallucinations. People say it elevates their consciousness, and they see otherworldly alien beings, famously dubbed the spirit molecule, the substance is highly associated with spirituality and used in the ancient South American brew ayahuasca. It is also used as a recreational drug called DMT. Now here's the thing, DMT is also naturally occurring in the brain in very small amounts, not enough to hallucinate though, but it is speculated that when you die, the brain releases a lot of DMT, and that is the reason why people get visions when they die, like a light at the end of the tunnel, an out-of-body experience, a flashback of their life, or meeting some kind of being, sometimes a deceased relative, or something powerful like an angelic being. Though this is just a theory. Kabu tells of his experience with death, and he does experience the usual out-of-body experience, but then he says when his heartbeat was restarted, he was off to a faraway place, and we get our first viewing of the mountains, one of the most important symbols in the manga. Mountains have always been cherished in cultures and religions all over the world. Its sheer size evokes a feeling of grandness, grandeur, and it has inspired people to consider it as a spiritual mystical place dealing with life, death, and God. But let's observe the manga first. The mountains first appear when Kabu's heart was restarted, and you can see him flying over the mountain range. We can see a river with a fish and a bird, and then Kabu falls, or maybe he moves very fast, and then he is resurrected. Here I think the mountains represent the passageway into another world, the afterlife. It is where the souls of the dead move on to the next world. Also, the rivers we see flowing down from the mountains represent the boundaries between those two worlds. Not just that, but I also believe that the waters from these mountains are sacred. They're the givers of life. I think that's why we see the fish and the bird. And when Kabu comes back to life, or becomes sober, like we see later on, the river is shown before that happens. He even comes out of the river at the end of the first volume. Well, it's a pun, but you get what I mean. After coming to his senses, he says that the experience is like returning to his old home in a faraway land. He sheds a single tear. It's a sorrowful, sad moment. I think this alludes to reincarnation or rebirth. There's a familiar feeling in death, and maybe that's the karma that has accumulated in that person's life. Later on in the second volume, we see Kabu revisiting old memories after flying above the mountains, moments in his life that cause him to be the person he is now. And is that not what karma is? The spiritual principle of cause and effect. But we'll talk about that in volume 2. There's more to mountain symbolism later on, so let's continue. Kabu and Seven continue their conversation, saying as far as man has ever been, to the end of the world, talking about death basically. You can see Seven being concerned about Kabu. A few panels show a dark shadowed face, literally. He's listening to one of his friends talking about dying and not caring about it pretty much. Look at Kabu's face, there's a little smirk on him. And the theme of Kabu not caring about his life is a big one. It's why there are constant flashbacks of the people wishing him a good life, like the bartender, as well as Seven. Seven leaves the apartment and Sally wakes up after reaching level 4 on the amplifier, as she's able to see Kabu's aura, which is like a bluish, pulsating flame. Then, feeling something wrong, Sally sheds a single tear, which is my profile picture, and tells Kabu that he is going to go somewhere far away. Now, there are two things to take from this. First is the blue aura, which is most likely related to the throat chakra, which is also blue. Chakras are energy points in your body, and when you master your chakras through meditation, you can enter a higher state of consciousness. The throat chakra is commonly associated with self-expression and the truth. Having trouble with your throat chakra means that you have trouble expressing yourself and your truth. That's exactly what Kabu is experiencing. He's having trouble understanding himself. You can see Kabu thinking about the bartender and Seven wishing him well to have a long life, but Kabu doesn't care. Or does he? At the start of the manga, that is definitely the case. Kabu literally kills himself to feel alive, to get that ultimate high. But after his experience at the bar, there's definitely a change. He at least gives it a thought. Maybe my life does matter. Further on, we will see that change, especially in that second volume. However, this isn't exactly a good theory because when your throat chakra is disturbed, a muddy blue aura will be emitted, and here it's a pulsating blue flame. So not the most accurate theory, but it will have some relevance in the third volume, I assure you. Now the second thing is Sally saying that Kabu is going to go somewhere far away, and I think that's because Kabu has the aura of a dead man. I think. I'm actually not quite sure about this, but we'll see what this means in the next scene. So, we zoom out into the city skyline, and then a wall-eyed man resting on a bridge. He gets tapped on the back and examined medically by the Bureau of Hygiene, the drug police, I guess. And I'm going to call him Mr. Walleye. Mr. Walleye here basically gets tricked into confessing his drug misuse by the agents. This is a very nice scene to paint a picture of the society of Ultra Heaven. It's pretty much the same as the real world with corrupt police and whatnot. You can see the crowd react, it's a usual occurrence. The Bureau of Hygiene is also quite important in the hallucination scenes later on. After that, we see an amp hippie sitting on a bench watching the whole thing, having the ability to see the auras of the crowd with his amp. Mr. Walleye sits beside him and reveals to him that he is wearing one as well. He mentions that wearing the amp leaves your soul in the open, defenseless. Then he attacks him with his aura and brings the hippie to the mountains. My theory is that Mr. Walleye here forces the hippie to synchronize with him, just like Sally and Kabu in the second volume. And when you synchronize with somebody, you feel what they feel. You think what they think. Mr. Walleye is in the mountains, which, as I said before, means the passageway or the border between this world and the other, supposedly a higher world. So I'm guessing that Mr. Walleye is in a higher state of consciousness than the hippie. And when the hippie is brought into the mountains, it might be a sort of forced ascension like we see in the later volumes. However, we see that Mr. Walleye isn't really going to make him ascend. He was just messing with him. Or is he? After the hippie runs away, we can see Mr. Walleye has kind of a blank face. He doesn't look like he's having fun chasing him away. It's almost as if he's disappointed. But why? Why is he disappointed in the hippie? Maybe he's looking for someone who has the ability to withstand his forced synchronization to the mountains. Someone who has the potential to ascend. And that's when Kabu walks by with his gleaming aura. He's looking for someone to give that drug to. That drug being Ultra Heaven. But here's the thing. We can make a reasonable guess that Mr. Walleye is not working with the hygiene department, since he just got fined by them. And why the hygiene department? Because of the two guys at the bar who are from the hygiene department that show up at the end of the volume. And of course, that will be discussed later. Now let's move on. We arrive at a plate of food. We can see rice, beans, I think it's curry. Anyway, we zoom out to the spiraling mall, and I'm not sure what this means. Is this supposed to show how dense and overpopulated the world is? Or are the hundreds of floors supposed to show that this is in fact a dream, an exaggerated look into the world? Or did Mr. KOIKE want to flex his drawing skills? I'm only sure about the last one. We meet a new character. I'm gonna call him Mr. Scarf. Mr. Scarf here calls out to Kabu, who's looking down the spiral. Actually, the whole scene from the start was from Kabu's perspective, if you paid attention. Mr. Scarf talks about some guy who jumped to the bottom of the spiral. We learn that the curry in the beginning is feijoada, a Brazilian dish that looks like the remains of the guy who killed himself. They talk for a bit, and we find out that Mr. Scarf is a drug peddler, and his hand is injured. They then have a drink and talk about a hallucinogen several times stronger than Peter Pan. And Kabu, being the suicidal junkie that he is, wants some of it. They then have a back and forth about the effect of drugs on society, how everyone can pick a mood like it's candy, and everything's fake. We get another glimpse into Kabu's nihilistic philosophy. He's pretty much given up on life and succumbs himself into chasing the highs of highs, even if it kills him. I just gotta say that this whole scene is just great characterization. We see how Mr. Scarf is, he has a lot of character. See a lot of his personality from his interaction with Kabu. They're okay friends, and how Seven looks out for Kabu by not telling him about the drug. he actually cares about Kabu, which makes sense because in the scene before he looks pretty concerned. And also, Kabu adding to what he said to the bar at the start of the manga, his philosophy. Yeah, well, Mr. Scarf tells Kabu about his friend who is similar to him. He says that he is in a dream, and he predicts the exact actions of a salaryman. After predicting correctly, he is convinced that he is in a dream and jumps down the spiral to his death. He also slices Mr. Scarf's hand with a knife to make him let go. It's pretty clear that Mr. Scarf's friend is on that extremely powerful drug that was mentioned before. This little story serves as a setup for Kabu's own trip later. They then leave the bar, the mall suddenly completely empty except for the two of them. It's closing time. And as a shortcut, Kabu jumps off into the spiral, stating that it's just a dream. Kabu doesn't really fall, he floats to the restaurant at the bottom. But instead of a restaurant, the glass roof shows the sky, and we transition into the window of Kabu's apartment, where we see Kabu on his couch. So the meeting between Mr. Scarf and Kabu really did happen, except for the last part where Kabu jumps off. That was just part of his dream. But is there a deeper meaning to that? Maybe the vision of the sky was just a symbol for freedom. That jumping to his death was a form of liberation, his dream. And why death? Because it's the same place where Mr. Scarf's friend died. So Kabu's phone rings, it's Sally, and she's asking him to go on a walk together. There's a small detail on Kabu always waking up late, probably after doing some drugs late at night. Well, they do go on to a walk in the park. Kabu sits on a bench, there's some banter between Kabu and Sally, and then we see a man walking towards Kabu, and Kabu predicts exactly what he's gonna do. Sally goes to buy some tea, and the man sits beside Kabu. It's Mr. Walleye again, and everything happens exactly as Kabu predicted. And that surprises him. Was it just a random guess, or is this a dream? Anyway, Sally runs back to an empty bench. Kabu fucking dipped, and you can tell that Sally definitely likes or at least cares for Kabu from her enthusiasm. Kabu and Mr. Walleye move to a pond where they talk about Pete. Mr. Walleye is willing to sell Kabu some. And then there's a short hallucination scene. I don't know what it means, so I'm just gonna move on. Mr. Walleye only gives him one. He only has one with a try first pay later policy. Kabu's confused. Who has this kind of policy? He knows something's wrong, but he goes for it anyway. And then it starts. Kabu's first trip with Ultra Heaven. It starts off as flashes from the future. Actually, he doesn't just see, it's as if his consciousness is getting transported onto one moment in time to another. He's on one side of the pond, and now he's on the other side of the pond. And now he's leaning on a tree behind Sally. Sally turns as Kabu starts to realize that this is the drug Mr. Scarf was talking about. Sally calls out to Kabu's shadowed figure, and his consciousness gets moved again to a busy street. A couple of things I want to say here. First is I'm sure that his consciousness is getting transported because we can see two Kabus before every jump. Second, I think the reason Kabu's figure is shadowed is because at that time, there is no consciousness in that body since it hasn't happened yet. Moving on, Kabu is in the middle of the street. He cannot remember anything. His consciousness is wobbly. He's not stable. He even says he's breaking apart. And then the manga panels actually break apart. Amazing. Then Kabu falls into some trash. He gets stared at by some pedestrians and they turn into a bunch of traditional masks, or I guess creatures. I can identify some of them. There's the Barong from Indonesia, Kon from Thailand. I think this one's an ogre mask that's modified, and this one's definitely some Aztec shit. Also, a nice detail is the hair on those masks, so you can tell who's who. And then Kabu touches the wall and reality goes to shit. The spread is one of the craziest things I've ever seen. Hand waves into a rainstorm, and then Kabu gets submerged and he goes nuts. There are interesting shapes in his eyes, probably referring to the experiences people have with DMT, where they see these geometric landscapes. Kabu slowly returns himself beside a tree through some trapezoids. He mentions to Sally that it was raining and she tells him it was not raining because it was an Indian summer. which means it's autumn. Kabu starts tripping again, and Sally turns into a DMT creature pretty much. Actually, everything's turning into a DMT creature. Most of the imagery with the weird shapes and all is definitely inspired by the paintings of people who have done DMT or ayahuasca. Someone like Pablo Amaringo, if you're interested. Actually, I want to go back a little. In the rainstorm, you can see a single drop of water falling into a big pool of it. I think the one droplet symbolizes Kabu's consciousness and is getting assimilated into the collective consciousness of the universe. His face appears in the puddle as little droplets of water reflect the lightning. But here's the thing about the droplets is that throughout the manga it's used as a motive for consciousness. So the lightning on the droplets, dividing it into two, might symbolize a huge change in Kabu, some kind of epiphany or shock. They kind of look like cells, each of them reflecting the lightning. Maybe it means that Kabu's whole body, whole foundation, is shook. And only when it is changed does Kabu submerge into the water. Entering the sea of consciousness, as he screams because he's overloaded with information from a higher dimension. So we move on to Kabu having a breakdown by the wall, and he is greeted by a couple of guys, the same guys from the hygiene department earlier on the bridge. Kabu is basically ridiculed by the agents as well as the crowd for being drugged up on this beautiful morning. Kabu resists and the agents shoot him, only to be nullified by some weird stuff coming out of Kabu's body. It spreads to the crowd and they love it. Then Kabu takes the agent's gun and kills him and his friend. The crowd is terrified. Kabu tries to shoot himself in the head, but the gun's out of bullets. From what I can see, this scene shows the attitude towards drugs within this society. Kabu here represents the drugs, a stereotypical addict who's high all the time like a crackhead in the streets. The agents represent the powers that be, the government, the authorities. They're painting the junkies as the villains and themselves as the heroes. They're cleaning up society's trash, and the crowd loves it. The crowd here represents the general public. This dynamic mirrors our own society where there is no regard for an addict's humanity. The authorities are power tripping over them. And the funny thing is that the drugs themselves probably came from the government, be it the hygiene department or the CIA. However, this paradigm is flipped when Kabu oozes out this weird stuff from his body after he gets shot. The stuff goes to the crowd and they love it. I think this is supposed to show the acceptance of drugs by the public, maybe alluding to the amendment of the Pharmaceutical Affairs Law. People start to take a look from another perspective. They start to question whether drugs are bad or not. Maybe it can be useful in society, and they start to empathize with people who do use drugs. They're victims, they're not monsters. It's all being manipulated by the government. But things go south rather quickly as Kabu takes the agent's gun and shoots them. When the junkies are given a chance from the people, they take revenge towards the authorities. The crowd is terrified as they realize that these people aren't trying to elevate their consciousness or help society. They're just here to take drugs and get high because they're addicts. There's a really nice touch here in the panel after Kabu shoots one of the agents. His face turns into something like an Oni mask, which basically means that he has become a monster. And this might be a callback to the earlier part where the crowd looks at Kabu and they all turn into monster masks. In the beginning, the crowd were the monsters. They did not understand Kabu, and yet they laugh at him, look down on him. They treat him like trash, which was probably why he was rolling with the trash, actually. At first, it was a misconception, supposedly. Supposedly, it was only a misconception on their part. But now, after shooting the cop, it was no longer a misconception. It's a fact. He's a monster, and he knows it. Kabu knows he's a monster, and that's why he shoots himself, or at least he tried to. The lack of bullets in a gun, I think, represents Kabu's subconscious. He doesn't actually want to die, and that's one of the biggest themes in a manga. Kabu thinks he has no reason to live, he wants to die, but at the same time there's something deeper that's pulling him the other way. From when the bartender says he'll pray for his long life and Seven's relief that Kabu's still alive. Moving on though, Kabu ends up getting chased by the crowd, and then he opens his eyes and leaves the trash, walks into the light, kind of implying that he's back to reality, and now he's on the streets. It looks normal, and then he meets Mr. Walleye. At first, Kabu's angry with him, but then he tells him that he's not done tripping. He's still in a dream. This surprises Kabu, and Mr. Walleye says two very important things. First is the fact that the drug has different effects depending on who's using it. Second is him mentioning that Kabu just had a dream more real than reality itself. And a dream more real than reality itself is paradise. He also says that the drug is called Ultra Heaven and that Kabu just needs to take more of it to escape into that paradise. This idea of a dream more real than reality ties back into Kabu's own philosophy regarding his drug usage. Previously in the pump bar with Mr. Scarf in the mall, Kabu talks about how everything's fake. Everyone's high on something, whether it be pumps, power, or anything else. So why not chase the best of the fake, the highest high? They're no better than him, that's why he's a junkie. He keeps chasing the ultimate high until he literally kills himself for a few minutes. But it turns out that death is a different kind of high. When he died, he felt like he was returning home, becoming one with the universe, maybe. I think Kabu felt empty after dying, as if there was something bigger, something grand he didn't understand. That's why he was cleaning his own room, waking up early, going to the park, being mellow. I'm just recapping what happened here. Now, Ultra Heaven is that ultimate high that Kabu's been searching for, the best of the fake. It puts you in the ultimate dream that's more real than reality. But what is realer than reality? It's your own mind. Without our minds, we can't even perceive reality. You can even say that it is the only proof you exist. Cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am, René Descartes. You can't trust your five senses. You can be fooled. It might not be real. So this is why Mr. Walleye says that the drug has different effects depending on who's using it. It depends on whose mind it is. Well, it's Kabu's mind and he's a suicidal maniac, so obviously it's not going to be fun for him. Which is funny because he thinks the ultimate dream is an escape, when in reality, no pun intended, by the way, when in reality it's a mirror. He's looking inside himself. So this reality is terrifying. Kabu wants to escape it, and Mr. Walleye tells him to take more of the drug. Now this might mean something more, but for me, it was Mr. Walleye telling Kabu to go deeper into the dream, deeper into paradise, what he's been searching for all this time. But also, this is all a dream sequence. Them on the bridge is actually in Kabu's mind. And Mr. Walleye telling Kabu these things is just Kabu talking to himself inside his mind. Or is it? We do know that Mr. Walleye is pretty good with the amp. Maybe he is in Kabu's mind using the amp to interface with him. Or not. I have a lot of doubts with this theory because later on Mr. Walleye's just laughing all the time. We also don't know whether he is with the hygiene department or not. It's very confusing, but I will go deeper on this in the second volume because there's just not enough info in the first one. Anyway, back to the main theory that Mr. Walleye is just a fabrication in Kabu's mind. In this case, the need to take more of the drug when it's going bad is just how Kabu copes with problems. He runs from it, escapes it. How? Drugs. And it just so happens that the drug he's taken is Ultra Heaven, and when he takes more of this drug, if we're being consistent with my initial theory, where if you take it, it puts you deep inside your own mind, and because of that, it feels more real. It feels closer to reality. So when he takes more Ultra Heaven, it becomes more real. Why? Because he gets deeper into his mind. Now we will come back to this, but first let's talk about what's actually happening in the pages. I'll start from when Mr. Walleye leaves. He tells Kabu to have a nice trip as he multiplies himself and does hand gestures, which are called mudra. Mudra are symbolic gestures used in Hinduism, Buddhism, and Jainism. There's a variety of them used here, and I can't really make out what it means. Maybe he's just trying to calm Kabu down because a lot of mudra is calming, like safe travels, something like that. After he disappears, Kabu vomits, which can mean a few things symbolically. Vomiting is a reflex your body has for getting rid of things that are bad for you, like poison. Dreaming of vomiting can therefore symbolize that you need to eject something that is causing you harm from your life. In this case, it can mean that he's trying to eject the drug itself, Ultra Heaven. Or maybe his mind is rejecting the fact that it's going through this horrible trip into his own psyche. Or maybe Kabu's just anxious, he's just having a panic attack. Either way, the hygiene police arrive to detain him, and Kabu pumps Ultra Heaven into his left hand to escape deeper inside the dream. Then the Ultra Heaven patch drops into the water, and I want to talk about the patch's design of a spiral or a swirl. Spirals are one of the most ancient symbols in the world, showing up in lots of cultures and religions. One of the main interpretations here is the path to enlightenment. The concentric rings that expand from the center to the outside are a symbol of growth, rebirth, and it also represents the connection between the human and the divine. And that connection comes from the endless nature of the spiral, symbolizing the vastness of creation. It even shows up in nature, in galaxies and all that. But also, focusing in the center of the spiral leads the mind to explore itself. That's why spirals can be hypnotic. It puts you in a trance, and that duality is the reason for the patch's design. It expands your mind by going deeper inside of it. Another thing I want to mention is the symbolism of spirals in Buddhism, specifically in the Buddhist symbol Unalom, which represents the path one takes to reach enlightenment. In some of the images, you can even find a lotus on top, which represents enlightenment. And guess what flower shows up later in the manga? Yep, the lotus. Just a little food for thought. Now, one more thing about the patch is the fact that it's dropped in the water, and I think the water, again, symbolizes the barrier between worlds, just like when Kabu was flying above the mountains and either falling in the river or waking up drenched in the toilet, when he was at the bar. This time, the water begins to swirl, as does Kabu's forehead right in the place of his third eye. The third eye represents a higher level of perception. In this case, Kabu's using it to look deep inside himself, the path into his mind. This is also why the focus is on the center of the spiral instead of its expansion. Then there's a big plane that flies over into the middle of the spiral. Not quite sure what it means, but I think it has something to do with Kabu flying over the mountains. Maybe flying is how you move through different levels of consciousness. Maybe the plane is related to traveling, traveling to another dimension. Or I think it shows the weight, like the immense energy being moved, because when a plane passes by, it's loud, a lot of bass. When you're near a plane during takeoff or flight, your whole body feels it. It vibrates. Maybe the plane is some sort of metaphor for the impact the drug has on Kabu, and that's why his head is multiplying. The cop inches towards him, telling him to turn around, as a voice tells Kabu to jump off, get out of this nightmare, get to the other side. And finally, the dialogue merges with the cops as they both say, turn around and face me. But facing what exactly? It could be to face himself, reality, and the problems that come with it. In this case, the cops represent those problems. And maybe the fact that Kabu gets shot symbolizes what Kabu thinks is going to happen if he does confront society. Death. But I am taking into account that we are inside Kabu's mind. Could also be, the author, Mr. KOIKE, wanted to show that it is futile. There's nothing he can do about it. He can't go against the nature of society. Though when I think about the ending in Volume 3, I don't think that's a message here. But back to the face. What is Kabu facing, and why is there an eyeball in the middle of the water? I think the eyeball is Kabu's subconscious mind. It's looking at himself and telling him to wake up, literally and figuratively. Figuratively, his subconscious is rejecting his own philosophy regarding his life, such as why he takes drugs and the fakeness of society. The fact is that philosophy and the lifestyle it brings gives him nothing but suffering. That's why he says, get out of this nightmare. Now, in the literal sense, he is literally waking up from this dream, as we will see in a minute. So Kabu turns his body towards the cops to see these two cops and he laughs at them. One thing to note here are the psychedelic snowflakes on the cops' faces. They are located in the same place as where Kabu shot those cops earlier in the trip. This means these are the same two cops that Kabu shot earlier, and that's why he's laughing. You can see a panel where Kabu starts to see the two cops in his eyes. You can see their reflection. And that's when Kabu started laughing. He realizes that this is a dream. They're not dead even though he shot them. He even says it's a dream. And then he gets shot. Metaphorically, he's waking himself up. We then zoom out to see the whole scene of him getting shot encapsulated in these bubbles, the same bubbles we saw before, although I also called them droplets. And as I said before, these droplets represent consciousness, but not just consciousness, also the memory, the mind, which you could say is part of consciousness. Amongst the bubbles, his body floats, and his forehead starts to crack in the place of his third eye, the third eye being related to the ability to explore one's inner realms through heightened perception. Another note is that Kabu's pupils are dilated, meaning that he's in some sort of vegetative state, unconscious, still dreaming. And then his whole body starts to crack, revealing some sort of light inside of him. His pupils become smaller, someone's saying he's waking up, adrenaline rising, then RAS, or the reticular activating system, gets engaged, which is a bundle of nerves at our brainstem that filters out unnecessary information so that important stuff gets through. Kind of like what Kabu's subconscious is telling him. And then there's the alpha waves. These all occur when someone's waking up. And Kabu does wake up, kind of. The body shatters, revealing a white ball of light, which transitions into Kabu's eyes. Get it? The light in his eyes. Anyway, you see someone's figure reflecting off the eye. He tells Kabu that he's in the hygiene department undergoing a cure for medication poisoning. We later see that there are two people here, the same guys from the pump bar in the beginning. Now, Kabu has supposedly woken up, but it looks like he's in a vegetative state, restrained with what appears to be pumps in his left arm. Is he being cured, or are they doing experiments on him, just as they say in the bar? Not sure. I'll talk about the implications of this scene at the end, but for now I'm just gonna move on. Kabu's synapses begin to go wild. Basically his brain is going wild. After that, three things here. His NGF concentration is peaking, NGF being the nerve growth factor, which is responsible for the growth of neurons. Then the microglia is activating, which is responsible for removing damaged or useless neurons and organizing the synapses. Finally, they say that the neurons are developing explosively. And this is all to say that the brain is growing rapidly and removing the damaged parts. Kabu's brain is quite literally being reborn. They then mention emelium, which is the drug on Kabu's arm. It's not real. And then actin is just a common protein. They try to use emelium to calm Kabu's brain. It doesn't work. They mention neuronal germination. It's also not a real term. But basically the brain is growing rapidly. It's growing too fast, in fact, that the blood supply can't keep up. He's gonna die. But he doesn't. Instead, the neurons, brain cells, gather in the third ventricle in the brain, which supplies the cerebral fluid to the brain. But more importantly, it is connected to the pineal gland. Now, the pineal gland is where the third eye is supposedly located in our bodies. Some even say that DMT is produced in the pineal gland. This has even been proven in rats, not in humans. They say you can activate your pineal gland to produce DMT, thus activating a third eye and reach a higher level of awareness. Another popular idea, as mentioned before, is that during birth and death, your brain releases high amounts of DMT. That is what this scene is alluding to. A new neural network, the door to paradise is opening. That's DMT, baby, and that's what he's talking about. That's also what's literally happening. But figuratively, well, he's being reborn. We transition into the bubbles congregating into one body. The reason all the bubbles were fragmented, separated, was because Kabu's mind was also fragmented. His mind is in disarray, as we can tell by his behavior and the trips, right? The fact that there could be many different timelines happening all in his mind is proof. So when they gather and form a single body, it symbolizes Kabu's mind getting his shit together, sort of like a self-realization moment, or enlightenment in a way. And the light that shatters Kabu's body might be where the bubbles congregate, and the light symbolizes enlightenment. That's why it shatters the body, the shell. The shell being Kabu's own philosophy, Kabu's own twisted idea of himself. And in comparison to how many bubbles and how vast it is, it's small. Kabu's philosophy doesn't even compare to what enlightenment offers. But I might be full of shit, because when the body reforms, it's still small, so you can disregard what I said about the size comparison. So anyways, Kabu appears on the mountains, or over the mountains, flying, and as I said beforehand, the mountain symbolizes enlightenment, the transition area between a higher and lower level of consciousness. This time, Kabu pops out of the sky above the mountains and he falls into the water. This makes me think that this whole trip has been happening in a higher level of consciousness, which is possible because of Ultra Heaven. He drops down into the water and emerges back into the pond, and that is the lower level of consciousness, supposedly. There is one thing that puts this into question. What about the agents experimenting on Kabu? And I'll get to this in a little bit. Let's finish the last few pages first. So let's take a look at Kabu's body while he's in the mountain realm and compare it to when he's asleep among the bubbles. When he was asleep, his body was smooth gray. When he was flying or falling, his body is white. And you can see these cracks, or maybe it's some kind of liquid. Actually, if we look back to the first time Kabu visits the mountains, the same thing happened. When he died and had an out-of-body experience, his body is gray, and when he appears above the mountains, his body is white. So what happened? I think in the mountain realm, which is again the transition area between two levels of consciousness, and in the process of moving between the two levels, there is resistance. You can't just ascend. That's why on the bridge, when Mr. Wale attacks the hippie, he can't attain that white form. It's almost as if he's getting dissolved in it. And that resistance is symbolized by the cold, windy mountains. But what exactly dissolved the hippie? And why are Kabu and Mr. Walleye unaffected? So I don't actually know what dissolved the hippie, but what I do know is Kabu and Mr. Walleye are unaffected. It's because they have attained a higher state of consciousness. From Volume 2, we know that the amplifier can heighten your consciousness level, and that's probably what happened to Mr. Walleye. He used the amp. But what about Kabu? Honestly, I don't know. I've spent a lot of time thinking about this, trying to connect it with Buddhism, where Kabu's nihilistic detachment from life somehow translates to escaping samsara. Let me explain a little. In Buddhism, there's the core belief that life is suffering due to desires and attachment. Also that every being is stuck in a cycle of death and rebirth in the realm of samsara. Though because life is suffering, this process is obviously not ideal. So the goal is to escape this loop. And to escape this loop, one must attain nirvana, in which one has no worldly desires or attachment, realize the true nature of reality, and follow the Eightfold Path. The Eightfold Path involves practicing mindfulness, cultivating wholesome states, self-restraint, among others. Now, Kabu obviously does not do this. He's a goddamn nihilist. Yes, he has no attachment to the world because he realizes reality is an illusion, kind of the same as Buddhism, but instead, he chases pleasure by escaping to a dream, and that goes against the Eightfold Path, which makes me confused. I think the drug Ultra Heaven allows him to circumvent this somehow. I mean, he doesn't exactly obtain full enlightenment, so tell me what you think in the comments. What exactly is the mountain realm, and what do you think is happening to Kabu? Because I'm confused. Anyway, Kabu falls back to the river and he goes back to the pond. There he's greeted by Mr. Walleye, who's laughing, and the volume ends there. Now let's talk about the agents in the lab. They are, in fact, the same agents we see in the bar. From the lab scene, we can infer that this could all be happening in Kabu's mind. And for this theory, I think we are currently witnessing a flashback. Basically, there are three realities. Reality 1 is the flashback, which is where most of the story is told. I'm talking about the pump bar, the apartment scene with Seven and Sally, the mall, and the park. Reality 2 is the drug trip Kabu has after taking Ultra Heaven. Then reality 3 is the true reality where he's locked up in a hygiene department experiencing a flashback. This is why we see all the weird shit happening, like Kabu jumping off the mall, and this is probably why during the drug trip, someone tells Kabu to wake up repeatedly, probably his subconscious. This will be discussed further in Volume 2, where we'll see more details on this. One last thing I want to talk about is Kabu's heightened state of consciousness in relation to the fact that he is in the hygiene department's lab. After Kabu leaves the bar in the beginning, we get a glimpse of the two agents talking about leading a stray lamb to the stairway to heaven, that stray lamb being Kabu. The agents messing with Kabu's head in the lab might be why he has this heightened state. It's artificial, it's not through self-discipline, it's like a fake enlightenment, but also real. I don't know. And that's it. That is it for the Volume 1 analysis of Ultra Heaven. Thank you for watching and sticking to the end. Thank you. Okay, now for the afterword. First of all, I want to apologize for the massive delay of this video. I promised it would come in May. It's August. I'm sorry. I also want to apologize for not replying to the comments as well as any messages on my mail. I had this like weird anxiety, maybe it's guilt, because I haven't finished the fucking video, and it's like I keep getting, delayed because I'm fucking lazy, and I felt like I didn't deserve all these supportive messages. But I promise in the future I will respond. I have my circumstances. A lot of shit happened to me, medical conditions, college, work. I actually got fired. Well, not fired, laid off. But really, the main reason I was so late, it was two things. First of all, I'm lazy. I could have finished it by June. A lot of procrastinating. But I think the reason I was so lazy is because Ultra Heaven is such a difficult manga to dissect. Its storytelling is esoteric. Its subject matter is complicated. I mean, most of the time spent making this video has been spent in reading about Buddhism and Hinduism, about a lot of the concepts in these two beliefs, and I was just having such a difficult time, not just connecting this manga to Buddhism, but understanding the religion itself. I mean, I don't know what I was expecting, it's a whole religion with multiple branches, and I was trying to connect things like death, rebirth, reality, emptiness, and so many things. But I just couldn't find a clear connection for a lot of stuff. I was even hesitating whether or not I should make the video because I felt like a lot of my observations were surface level stuff with, like no reference. I feel like I missed a lot of stuff too, but I'm hoping someone else can correct my mistakes in the future. Or maybe I'm gonna be the one that corrects my own mistakes with the help of you guys, if anyone's gonna help. Another thing I want to mention is the future of this channel. I'm not gonna go straight into analyzing the second volume of this manga. I want to make more manga recommendations, which is the original goal of making this channel in the first place. The second volume is probably coming in December or something, maybe even January. I mean, this manga is just rough, okay? It's a rough manga to analyze, so I apologize in advance. Other than that, subscribe if you want more manga recommendations, and thank you for watching, sticking to the end. I really appreciate it.